everyone. My name is Carolina, and I work as a talent manager for Carafi. Currently, I support Kingfisher in opening their first tech hub outside of UK in Poland.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Martin Fahy, TA Director at Ocado. Worked in a few different industries before, from hospitality to retail, and Ocado, many people in the room will know them as a grocery retailer for posh people, but what they actually are is a global tech company that are based in 13 different countries, 11 different customers. So that's part of our challenge, elevating them from being known as a retailer to a leader in the tech space, and that's me.
Hello everybody, I'm Nera Daruni. I was at Kia Group. I literally just left on Tuesday, so I'm now a lady of leisure, which is lovely, usually covered in Play-Doh or slime at the moment. So yeah, I was at Kia Group for 5 years, and prior to that I was at Carlsberg for 5 years as well. So, but yeah, very varied background, charities, tech, yeah, everything.
Perfect, brilliant. So my first question is a nice, easy one to get us started. In all of the places that you've all worked, have you always had the same definitions for things like time to hire or time to offer? Have you always used the same metrics in exactly the same way?
No. I think different industries, they tend to have different things that they focus on. So certainly for me, I think it's definitely been a frustration of mine that we don't have that standardised approach, because not only is it, we get the same from our board, it's different for us in construction or it's different for us in FMCG. But it's very different when you've got organisations that are looking to bring different talent from different industries, certainly from a board, to be able to elevate your business and grow it. So if you've got somebody on your board that might have come from Google, and then into a construction business, for example, those conversations are going to be very different. So I think for us, something that I've certainly struggled with my career is how do we, as TA professionals, elevate our own brand as being a seat at that table. So like you said, we're often that poor cousin of HR. Why should we be that poor cousin? Why can't we be the ones leading HR and doing that from the front? But we seem to always follow them rather than them following us. So I think that's something for us to be able to do, to be able to drive our own brands forward, because I think that will help us give credibility to the board when it comes to people, because we're the ones that are talking to those candidates, we're the ones that are attracting them, and then retaining them. Yeah, because I think one of the things that we talk about with data, it's always cost per hire, time per hire, but actually, we rightly or wrongly avoid that quality of hire because we think, well, it's not our fault, we've hired them, that's onto the business now to see whether they're quality. But actually, that's a HR metric, so we do avoid that, so yeah.
Brilliant. Martin, have you always used the same metrics to mean the same things?
So I think, no. I think that's a loaded question. You know the answer to that? Absolutely not. So I think part of the challenge that we all face is having that standardization. And the reason why it's so important is, I'll share when I went into Screwfix as head of TA, and I'm told by the HRD our time to hire is 19 days. We'd like to get it down to 15. Brilliant. That's really clear. I can have a look at that. Let's have a look. And then I get into the weeds of the data, and I'm like, okay, I've got some bad news. It's actually not 19 days, it's 26, right? Because actually the way we're measuring it is quite unusual and inconsistent, and the number that you're reporting to the board isn't accurate. And then the problem with that becomes, I can't share with the leadership that we're bringing time to hire up, right? So how do we tackle that? How do we get into it? So that's problem one, right? So going in are the metrics that we reporting on actually accurate, actually consistent? I think the second problem is, without these standardized definitions, without these standardized metrics, the most common talked about metric is time to hire, right? And unless we measure it in a consistent way and look to break that down, TA ends up being on the hook for time to hire period, right? Whereas in reality, time to hire is a relay race. TA plays an important pivotal role in that, in terms of us controlling the process, but who else is involved in that? HR involved in that, Reward are probably involved in that, obviously hiring managers in terms of prioritising what it is that we're looking to do. There's so many people that are involved at various stages that make up the overall time to hire that we need to be able to break that down in order to understand it. And then the third thing around the challenge with having these non-standardized metrics is that I can make an adjustment to go, right, time to hire was X, we've implemented these initiatives and it's now Y. And then a senior leader will go to me, why is that good? And I'll go, because I say it is.
Yep.
Right? Like, that's all I got. Like, I can't compare it against.
Or it's better than last year.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's
Yeah.
better than last year, right?
We control the narrative.
Yeah.
Carolina.
I think the time to hire is really interesting one because from my experience in many different organizations, people define time to hire slightly differently. So there were some differences on how people think about time to hire. And this data could only be accurate when you try to do some reporting from your ATS if everyone is using the ATS the same way. In my career, I've only had this situation once when I knew that all my team is using ATS exactly the same way because they were trained by the ATS people, by the ATS providers, and everyone had exactly same training. So I knew I had some trust that data was accurate. And as mentioned before, it caused a lot of problems because the data is inaccurate, and of course we have to report to the board and take in consequence of our time to hire not being what they expect. I think also the second one is quality of hiring. I think that's really, really interesting one because I can give you an example when in one of my previous companies, quality of hire was measured by how many people will receive the max of their bonus. So that was a very, very interesting metrics. I can see from your faces that yes, it was quite surprising. So what has happened is that for 2 years, company was doing really well financially, and there were a lot of people in the business who received their max bonus. Year 3, companies had some financial struggles, and there was a message that perhaps they will be evaluating the bonus, whether people get how much of the bonus. They will be evaluating that in a slightly different way. So decision by our head of talent was to keep the same metrics, but of course, what we realized it was the wrong decision because very few people that year received their max bonus. So I think very interesting, and of course, we had that, at that time we were reporting to the board and to CEO, and we had this very intense conversation about, obviously, our quality of hire has went down because of that metric. So I think it's also important that we make sure that we set ourselves for success. And if we're not comfortable with some of our metrics and we think that they don't make sense, we talk about it, we speak up early. And I think we have to be more persistent in that situation when we have some concerns that it's not going to work.
And I think it's really interesting for walking into an organisation or walking into a new job or a new department or something of that ilk, and the comment you made there, Martin, around you have data from someone that leaves that department or job, and you inherit that, and the first thing you do is look at it and think, oh my God, that's not accurate. But it becomes very difficult to say, here, I'm in my new role, I'm brilliant at my job, but the first thing I'm going to do is increase time to hire by 30 days. Yeah. That's a difficult message to get to. Can you talk me through some examples of where you've walked into an environment where the data was perhaps inaccurate and what the steps are that you've taken to try and get people aware of that and change perception?
So I think the first one is honesty, right? Because if you look, all businesses want to move forward in terms of seeing themselves as being data-led, right? Using data to make decisions. And I mentioned that my Screwfix example about when I go in and like during my induction period, I'm going, yeah, this isn't good. We need to get out in front of people. And so step one is kind of facing into that and being in front of the senior leaders to talk about where we're at the moment, how we want to use TA as being a data-led function to improve business performance. And to do that, we need to look at data in a slightly different way. So I think the first one is having those honest conversations for others that end up in a similar situation, because actually we all want to show that we're on a journey and we're making progress. And I think it's really important to nail down that starting point, right? Where are we starting from? Here's point A. Where do we want to get to in point B? And then the journey that goes in between that. So I think the first one is honesty and engagement of the business about where it is that we're at today, why we're there, and why data is so important to us, and how we're going to be part of that solution for the individual functions.
Yes, there's an element here of assess the data you've got right now and make sure that kind of understand where you actually sit and be truthful back to the business. But how do you know your performance is good, bad, or indifferent in a talent acquisition function? So, Nerida, when you take on, your new challenge, you'll look at the data, you'll get information, but how will you know it's good or bad?
I think a lot of it will come down to those conversations that you have with your stakeholders, with the board, but also understanding the minds of those candidates that you're trying to attract. Because ultimately, one is you need to attract the right talent. We need to, hire them, and we need to retain them. But we won't know what good looks like straight away. I think there'll definitely be some time. Something that I implemented at Carlsberg was that rather than time to hire and all of those sorts of metrics, was that empty chair cost. I think that's something that really helped the board understand that that need for TA to be able to showcase actually that vacancy. How much is that costing me? I know that this person's leaving on X day and we're hiring before that, but it might take me 3 months to find them. If we're hiring the people before they leave, that empty chair cost means that we're saving 600,000 on that patch alone. And we were able to get that metric quite easily because of, being able to look at that sales data. So I think it will depend on the industry. I think it will depend on what data they have available. What ATS they have as well. I mean, we've just moved to RQ, but we use Taleo, and being really transparent, depending on how you cut the data each time, gave you a completely different result. And we had to literally be like, right, how have we cut this data this time? Let's make sure we record that, because you're taking that to the board. And many organizations don't have ATSs that give any data, or they're having to manually do that data. So I think it will depend on what organization I join. But I think data is something that's here to stay, because we know that is really critical to the board to be able to justify, as you said, our existence, which just really infuriates me. We shouldn't have to justify it.
So that's a really good point. And I think it'll be interesting to kind of, just by kind of showing nods of heads or disagreement, put your hand up and have a go. But quite often we meet TA people that will sit around and, when they're looking at their own performance within an organisation, will be very inward-facing, and then look at some information and spot a problem within the business, and then go and correct that. They don't know whether that's a industry-wide problem or wherever it may be, and that becomes very insular.
Yeah.
But the other comment that you've made there, I'd be interested to see whether the other two panelists share it, is just that thought of you're constantly reviewing your own internal information, not necessarily benchmarking that against external performance. Would that be consistent?
100%. And I think, Nerida, you mentioned it as well. Like, one of the things that we tend to gravitate towards is meeting with internal stakeholders and asking them, their view on TA, what are the problems that you're trying to solve, and it just helps us become even more insular, right? In terms of just, we're doing something that is specific for this company. We're not measuring it. We're kind of being led by the function. Sorry, we're led by the business rather than driving it ourselves, which is, to some of your comments at the start, Graham, is absolutely where we want to be. It kind of feels like such a typical HR narrative, right? That we meet the business and we have conversations with them about what they want to see, and then we end up trying to implement and deliver it, rather than going, look, we are TA, let me tell you what we're going to do and why we're going to do it, and this is the benefit, this is the results we're going to get at the end of the day.
But people are too secretive. Organisations are too secretive with that data. So how do you give that data to be able to say this is what that narrative says to us as a sector?
Yeah.
I think also what Martin said is really important about really even educating your stakeholders on what good looks like in different markets. I have that experience in working on different markets, and when internally we have little to none knowledge about how recruitment looks like, what talent we can get, what's the skill set, and sometimes the objectives that is set up by CEO, by the boards are not, cannot be reached in different markets. So I think we need to really educate our stakeholders that there's going to be differences between markets. Some things that we can do in UK, perhaps we can't do in other markets.
To the panel.
I mean, we need to influence more. You know, we're the experts at the end of the day. I think, you know, I wouldn't go to an MD of a business and say, this is how you build a building, you know, but we often, you know, when people say, oh, but I need this sort of stuff, and you're like, well, hold on, that doesn't make sense as to what we're trying to achieve or deliver for the organisation. But I think we need to get better at influencing them around the expertise that we have as TA leaders and professionals, and the experience that we've got outside of that business as well to help drive those conversations forward.
You know, when you get a board director or a really difficult stakeholder, or just a stakeholder, come and talk to you about a challenge or an issue in your area, how many times do you create a new metric? How many times have you thought, right, well, here's a challenge I'm getting. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go out, look at the numbers, recut them, and then come back with something different?
I would say often, just because we are reporting a lot for Kingfisher, for our clients now, and we do weekly, monthly, and quarterly reporting. So, and there's a lot of challenges. They challenge us a lot, and there's a lot of objectives thrown at us. So I think every next meeting, we're almost trying to be prepared for the next things that they might throw at us. So I think it's, yes, we do that a lot at the moment. So I think it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Interview to offer ratio, number of candidates submitted per role, number of female candidate versus male candidate, because we do technical recruitment mainly, so that's a big one for them also. Yeah, so that would be the main ones.
Graham, if I can jump in, I think something that probably a lot of people in the room have faced is over the last 3 or 4 years, people have realised that D&I might be sort of important, and traditionally not something that we report on, right? So TA has been asked to now report on these metrics, but again, we're coming against the same problem, right? Which is the non-standardisation, because, and sorry, when I say D&I, I mean gender, right? Because that's the easiest one to report on, so that's what people tend to focus on. So, okay, we can do that, we can implement that, and we can track that and provide data on that. But then the second that you provide a metric or a result of a metric that is anything other than a 50-50 split, it goes, oh, that's not very good. But is it not? Like, what does that look like in terms of the competitors? What does that look like in terms of the industry? And we actually don't know. So we end up back in that same cycle of, can we just make it better than last quarter or last year without actually understanding what good looks like?
We had a question come through Slido, so I will keep an eye on.
I mean, I'm sort of head of employer brand, so my sort of data that we looked for, and actually something that we do provide the board and maybe a metric for you to look at, is certainly that Glassdoor metric. Where do we compare to our competitors? Who are those competitors? So for us, it's very clear who it is because it's other construction tier one contractors. But for people here, it might be that your competitor is somebody that lives down or has another office down the road. That could be your competitor. So being able to provide that metric, not just that score, but what does that break down into? What is their D&I sort of score? What is their work-life balance score? That's certainly something that we've done quite a bit at Kia, and we've really actually worked quite a lot in being able to develop that, because I think when I started it was 3.2, we were at 4.4, and above all of our competitors on all of those metrics, and it was something that the board were really keen on. Actually, one of the metrics, which is the top CEO, which they've stopped doing now, that was one of our CEO's top one. He was like, where am I at with that? So he was actually driving that forward, even though there's no top CEO anymore. So, but yeah, it was, it helps keep that engagement from a TA perspective as well. So although it was funny to me that he was so interested in that, I was like, look, do you know what? He's interested. Love that.
Yeah. And there's the brand and marketing element of that, which shows there is a playbook for that. But what about talent acquisition metrics and conversions and is there anywhere that people go and feel they get reliable information that they would use? Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, sorry, this is going to sound like a plug, but I suppose get some of it from Graham and Karafi, right? But prior to meeting Graham 4 years ago or so, when I worked for Wagamama, it was super tight industry. So phone up the competitors, phone up Nando's, phone up Yo Sushi, phone up Carluccio's and some of the others.
Give it to you.
Some people told me to go away or something similar. But some people were able to form like really honest relationships with, where we would share certain things. And again, keep repeating it, the non-standardization makes it difficult to compare apples with oranges, but it is helpful to kind of have that context and share that knowledge if you can break down those barriers with your main competitors.
I feel like I'm super lucky because we are hiring in Poland at the moment, and we use specific tech job boards, and they all have this function of reports, and they all send me reports every month, every quarter, like bigger reports, yearly reports, salary reports, competitors reports. So it's really nice that we have that option available to us. We are super lucky in that sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think there is a real struggle around external information around conversions, right? And that's kind of the purpose of what we're trying to do. But it's a massive challenge. It's a difficult thing to get to. At last count, there was something like about 720 TA metrics that can be measured, right? And I think we've talked about this as a panel. Sometimes you get asked the question, so you go to one of those, then never report on it again, but it got you off the hook in that argument. How do you go about defining your critical, non-negotiable metrics? And by that, what I mean is any marketing function has basket value, lifetime value, cost of acquisition, cost of retention. These are universal metrics. There are lots of other indicators around that, but they have the kind of Jesus Bolt type metrics. How do you go about defining yours?
I think it depends on the organisation and what they're trying to achieve. What is the business's objectives overall for the next 2, 3, 5 years. So I think that does play a massive part on it. For me, the last 5 years, the focus has always been around, D&I and how can we bring more people from different backgrounds that actually represent our community. So it's not actually always female within our industry, because there's not enough females that want to be in construction, unfortunately. So for us, it was definitely how we can help from a low socioeconomic point of view. I think, for me, I think that there is a challenge around what we want as TA professionals and what the organisation wants. And I think that's where we need to get better at really understanding what those business metrics are and what actually they're trying to achieve, so that we can then feed into that. The narrative that we create based on that data is up to us, and how we can then define our own TA strategy moving forward. But it's not as easy as this is the metrics that we want to achieve, because we need to work with the business to understand what they need. Otherwise, they'll just be like, oh, it's just TA again.
So what you're saying there really is that certain businesses, you'll use certain different metrics. You'll use those you'll use your own kind of judgment to work out which metrics might be important to that organisation, and then you'll create the narrative around it, right? So that's really common, right? So and that's where things are. So what ends up happening is recruitment becomes a bit of an art, not a science.
Yeah.
So I guess there's the big challenge. How much do you think that impacts the board's perception or the wider HR leadership team's perception of talent acquisition? If the numbers always change, or the metrics we're using always change, and the narrative is given by that person to almost usurp those metrics, how has that impacted the value people or the credibility of the function, Martin?
Well, I think it impacts the value and credibility in the sense that a lot of these metrics are there to justify our existence, rather than just being brutally honest, right? As opposed to actually driving business performance. Because I think within internal TA, we get the majority of our metrics from recruitment agencies, right? Because I think if we take a step back and go, right, where did metrics come from, right? So recruitment agencies are essentially sales environments, and sales environments are super great at measuring metrics and using that to drive performance, right? Because many years ago, a clever person worked out that X plus Y equals money. So brilliant, we're going to measure these and we can accurately use that to drive performance. And these include, like, CVs, X amount of CVs sent results in X amount of interviews, results in a hire, right? So we've taken these, because many people move from external, myself included, external recruitment agencies into internal. It's like, great, okay, I've got these metrics that, because Graham said, HR historically had no metrics at all. So you can kind of go in and go, right, I can sound clever here. I've got some metrics that I can implement. So then we use that. Except the rationale for most of us, myself included again, moving from external recruitment agencies into internal is we want to make an impact. We want to make more of a difference to businesses, but traditionally we don't measure that, right? We're stuck in this cycle of justifying our existence based on these historical metrics that we use, and we're not, I suppose, being creative and showing our commerciality with these metrics. And it doesn't have to be the case. We can do more to show quality of hire and how we can impact that. Like, for example, if you're fortunate enough to be in an environment that hires salespeople, then what's the average revenue that someone drives in their first year? Well, that's a commercial metric that we can take, that we can, not claim entire credit for, but we can use that to start the narrative. Yeah, we'll take it. We can use it to start the narrative to go, actually, we are responsible for the bottom line, right? We're not just a cost function that gets our budget reduced every year because people fail to understand our importance. That's if you're employing salespeople. If you're in a customer-facing environment, what can we do to measure candidate experience? Now, of course, candidate experience is important for all of us, but if you're in a retail or hospitality environment like I have been in the past, then actually the candidates are our customers. So actually, what's the impact we're having on that? There's a super interesting case study done by Virgin Media around candidate experience in 2017. I encourage people to Google it and seek it out because it is quite interesting, where they were able to measure the impact of rejected candidates and people that lapsed their Virgin Media subscription, right? So they were able to present back that actually the poor candidate experience that we've delivered has resulted in a loss of millions, right? Which is a great headline and then gets people taking interest in terms of the commerciality of talent acquisition. One of the things that we started doing at Wagamama when I was there is, okay, how can we enhance candidate experience? Well, actually, anyone that gets invited to a face-to-face interview will say, have a free meal on us, here's a £30 voucher, right? So that you can leave with that hopefully positive experience even if you didn't get the job. Now, the average spend of people that we gave those vouchers, those £30 vouchers to, was £68, right? So all of a sudden you're starting to talk about money again, and CFO gets interested then, right? Rather than just the HRD about what's going on in TA, how can you impact that? Now, the other thing that we need to measure is quality of hire, right? Because, like I said, the reason that many of us moved into internal is we want to make a bigger impact on the industry. You mentioned before around, actually, we don't want to be totally on the hook for people's performance because we're reliant on the induction experience and people being good managers. And we shared that, of course, basing the bonus on it is also contrasting with business performance, and there's lots of other things, but and it takes a long time, right? Because you could easily go, right, how many people are getting promoted within 2 years, right? How many people change jobs? How many people get pay rises? There are things that we can go after, but it's kind of playing the long game. I think that's where it's really important why actually collectively as an industry we need to have more of these conversations like we're having this morning around we need to start now because it's going to take a while for us to move away from these historical metrics.
I think the issue here is that a lot of what we do is reactive, and especially in consulting when we are there because our client has a problem. So it's usually they have this huge hiring target, they're massively behind, and they are asking us to help. So I think the question is, when do you introduce the long-term goals? Because you tend to fixate on those short-term goals that your board, your client is pushing you towards. But when is the good moment to start introducing those long-term goals that will transform the organization, that will make that impact, that will make that actual change in the function?
I think this is a really interesting point, and it's one of those bits that we see quite often when we go and talk to TA people. So some of the more progressive TA professionals out there will have really clear strategies, be it global with some localization. But what they'll end up with is a real strong data architecture behind that. And what that means is, if you think about it, I wish I'd have done this, actually, I should have done it, just counted every metric that was mentioned up here with our TA. And I think we're probably beyond, nearly approaching 100 right now, different metrics. Because we all know lots of different metrics, like a bit like flying a plane. If you ever go in a cockpit, there's a million different buttons and things to do if you're a pilot. But really, their dashboard has 4 things. Do I need to go faster? Do I need to go slower? Do I need to go right? Or do I need to go left? Now, to go faster, I'll go to these metrics behind. Well, that will be slower. But the reality is they'll watch those metrics, and then what they'll say is, okay, but that's telling me I'm going too fast. So what do I do? Well, I do this. And then all the metrics come behind it. But the reality is, it feels like, from a lot of the conversations here, that whenever people talk to us, we know we're embarrassed by the amount of data we have, but what we haven't done is go to the business. Well, it's really easy flying a plane. You just watch these 4 things, and if one of those goes up, you touch one of these 100 buttons. You need to be trained. And you do that. But all I'm doing is watching that. Now, some of the more advanced TA people that we talk to sit there and talk about, here's my strategy, and here's the 4 things I look at. And when they go wrong, or when they start to twitch, the needles twitch, here's the 12 things I look at then. I wonder, is that kind of data architecture anything that you've been able to implement in any place that you've been so far?
So I'd say that takes time.
Yeah.
It is a long time because one of the first things going in is understanding the data. And actually, quick show of hands: does anyone work in a business that has more than one ATS? Yeah. Yeah. That's,
Only one. That is actually
I
amazing.
know.
In a room.
No. Oh no.
Oh yeah, two. Yeah.
I think because it needs to move in three stages. I think the closest I got right is taking 3 years to actually get there, because I think phase one is, are we getting the basics right? Right, and then phase two, what do we need to change to actually start measuring the data? And then to something Narita said a moment ago is actually what's the insight of that, and how that can change things, and how we can use that to implement the right things. But I think, so I'll be honest, so much of my job is around fixing the basics and going into businesses and going, right, okay, we're actually not even measuring the right things, right? Let alone driving the insight. So a lot of the work that I find I've spent my career doing is around setting up the fundamentals, right? Because we're not measuring the right things, we're not able to draw insight from it, rather than the aspirational stuff that you're talking about, Graham, which is actually once we've got those 3 or 4 buckets and those 12 things beneath each 4, then we can go, right, actually we can now do some really kind of inspiring and inspirational stuff to start to move things. It's more around, as I said, clever initiatives about how we can try and drive ourselves to be a bit more commercial.
Yeah. Okay, and I think that's the objective of this, is not to go back to that Dunnhumby example. What are the kind of real basic dashboards are we looking to know and be able to benchmark against the market? And then how do we differ that from a retail sector, from a banking sector, to disciplines like technology versus finance or HR? So if we just really concentrate on understanding what the dashboard is, what are those 4 big pillars, then we can get more complex as time goes on when we start to create those metrics. In your opinion, as a panel, what would be those really basic, non-negotiable terms that you'd want to be able to benchmark against the market?
Okay, so I've got 4, right? So one is TA performance, right? So to understand what the recruiters are delivering and are the conversions right, et cetera, some of the metrics that we discussed earlier. The second is pace, and I purposely separate that out from TA performance because I mentioned before about it being a relay race, and actually hiring managers are involved, HR, reward, there's lots of people involved in that. The third one is impact, right? So quality of hire, and again, there's more work to do to measure that effectively. And then the fourth one is brand. How is the brand fitting in with that? How is that supplementing our success? So for me, they're my 4.
Okay, nice. I would, so that's perfect, but which metric would you use? So you've basically said there pace, quality, or pace, performance, impact, and brand. There's an awful lot, but I think if we were to workshop that, we'd probably come up with about 1,700 things under those. So which metric would you use as your starting point, your sun-dried tomato for each of those? Which would it be?
Okay, so I would go pace, right? With the caveat of
no, not which of the 4. What metric
no,
within each 4?
Get that. So times higher, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I know you're going to boo me. Times higher with the caveat of understanding the timestamps that make in that, right? Okay. And how that makes that up. So I know where to focus my energy, right? Because without the timestamps, it just becomes, we're just going to try and reduce times higher, right?
So one of them is time to hire. There's your needle, and then you've got loads of buttons behind you as to which one it is. Narrative.
So one of mine would be that empty chair cost, because I feel like we don't do enough of workforce planning within TA. We get it from HR, which just makes me frustrated as a whole. But, if we could say, right, we know that these are the vacancies that we will have, or 80% of those vacancies ahead of time, we can recruit, we can have that pipeline ready, we can make those offers when somebody resigns, you've got somebody in there maybe before they start or literally on that day after if you don't have that cost to break down. And then brand awareness, because I feel like if we're talking about trying to make the impact for our business from a commercial aspect, we need to think about those people that we're attracting, but we also need to have the brand presence to be able to attract them and retain them.
Got it. So time to hire is one of your needles on the dashboard. The second is cost per hire. Was it what you were saying?
Cost per hire, empty chair cost. So how much is it costing the business for us to not have somebody in that role?
Okay.
I think for me, the important one is how many people are responding to our offering. I think because if there's not enough responses, it gives me some indication there's something wrong with our offer, whether it's not competitive or whether we're going to struggle to find that skill set on that particular market where we are hiring. So I think that's important one for me.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different bits, right? Everyone will see certain things as different challenges. And one of our challenges as a sector is to kind of work out, right, so time, how quick, quality, how well are we converting, costs, and brand would be the four kind of needles I think are right. But within that, everyone will have a different idea of what would be the right piece. The big challenge we have as a sector is to work out, okay, so what is the nappy? What's the sun-dried tomato? What is that in the cockpit, the four needles that we look at? The metrics that all affect those needles, we need to order. And I think that's the first challenge about creating a proper benchmark will be, what are the needles? And therefore, how do we submit that by domain and by sector?
I wonder if that's up for us to decide. Because actually, if we had a room full of CEOs or board members, one, that would be amazing for us to be able to influence them all together and be able to help the TA community longer term. But actually, I do feel like sometimes we do what we think is right rather than what the business needs. And I think we probably need to reflect that back.
Mm-hmm. So, on that basis, how would the CEO tell you the direction of the business?
With their own strategy. Hopefully they'll have one, 3, 5, 10 years.
Yeah. So if we take this out of TA for a second and say you're the marketing director, you've just taken a new job and you kind of, you've taken this new job because you love the CEO's vision. Mm-hmm. Then you come up with a marketing strategy. Do you go to the CEO and say, how do you want that measured? My marketing strategy.
No, because you're the expert, but you need to be able to effectively influence them.
Yeah.
To make them think it's their idea, because that's half the battle, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's, look, we know that people that are in those positions are usually wanting to make all of those decisions. So for us, it's like, right, okay, great, we've got your vision, we know what we're doing. You've come up with this idea, and this is how I'm going to deliver it for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's an element of us selling ourselves, right? And because every CEO will have a vision, right? Because it's on them to engage the business and make sure that we're all driving in the same direction. And I think we need to kind of get a space and have enough kind of bravado to go, let me tell you how I'm impacting your vision.
Yeah.
Right? Because we all do have metrics, we all do measure it, but actually, do we present our insight in a way that links it to the CEO and business's fundamental strategy?
There was a question from slide. Have you found the pressure to hire quickly increases the...
No, because you should have that metric prior. You should understand what we're trying to deliver and what we're trying to achieve for the business org structure, and therefore recruit ahead of time. So actually... Absolutely, and we don't do it effectively. I've not worked in any business that has done it effectively, and I think it's an ongoing topic with the RO100 around that workforce planning. So we do talk about it quite a bit, But if you have those vacancies ahead of time, you've got plenty of time to find that quality candidate. Actually, if anything, we risk not having quality when we're so reactive, because it's like, oh, there's nobody in the role, we need to find somebody to get that bum on a seat. It should never be a bum on a seat.
I think that's where it becomes important for us to have those 3 or 4 metrics that we're regularly cascading into the business and helping them understand, because actually we don't want to measure things in isolation. I think, cost and the commerciality of what we're saving the business is super important. The empty chair bit, and how that links to the commercial aspects of talent acquisition is really important, because you look at it as a collective, right? Yet we all know, if you have a one-on-one conversation with the hiring manager and said, do you want someone quickly or someone awesome, right? They pick the second one. So I think it's how we use those 4 metrics in parallel with each other.
And I think we're going back to influencing, and I think it's also important to understand how your stakeholders, how your clients will respond. And our client, for example, responds very well to data.
Yeah.
So we are overwhelming them with data in order to influence. So we need to speak the same language as our stakeholder, as our client, in order to influence them in our direction. When we know that something would not work, we show them as much data as possible, as much research as possible.
Well, no one will disagree with you.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's a piece of string, really, isn't it? It could be anything.
So I'd go really, really simple. Like a lot of this, I'm always reminded of a Churchill line where he wrote a massive 5-page apology to his wife. And anyone who's ever worked with me will have heard this story a million times, and I can see some groaning. I'm like looking at certain people. But he wrote a massive apology to his wife, 5 pages, and the last line said, "I'm really, really sorry for the long apology. I didn't have time for a short one." And that is what I would do in your sense. I'd go really basic.
Yeah.
Am I hiring quickly? Am I hiring well? And measure that based on impact of thing. How much does it cost for me to hire? And how attractive are we in the marketplace? And if you just looked at 4 very basic metrics, you would be able to articulate, I know where we're going, and I know hiring's really important. This is how quick I do it. This is how much it costs. This is how good I do it. And this is how much impact our brand has in the marketplace. And if you just kept it very, very simple, then people will tend to actually, but keeping data really simple allows people to ask you another question.
Yeah.
And then you can then get more sophisticated by the business demand. But that would be my real feeling. Don't get too complex. Go really simple.
Because if they've not had that data before, if you go really complicated, you might not be able to articulate it in a way that you feel comfortable with that data. I definitely recommend ensuring that you cut the data exactly the same every single time. Because actually, if you're only just now providing that data to them, if it's different in a month's time, you'll be like, how did I do that? Why is it so different? So definitely make sure that you're doing it exactly the same way all the time until you're in a position to maybe articulate why that data is being cut differently moving down the line, because you've evolved and actually you're looking to achieve something more for the business.
That's brilliant advice, because no one likes a reformed alcoholic, right? And when you give your board some data, and then you give them another set of data, and then another set of data, they'll start asking you more and more and more and more questions. And before you know it, you haven't got time to recruit because you're answering their data questions. So keep it really, really simple and consistent.
Yeah.
That's a great point.